Mortar shell decapitation. On July 4th, 2011, residents of Fargo, North Dakota gathered for what should have been a typical Independence Day celebration. A 41-year-old construction worker and father of three had purchased professional-grade fireworks for the neighborhood display. Among them was a 3-inch mortar shell, a cylindrical explosive designed to be launched from a tube and detonate high in the air. As darkness fell, he began the show. Children sat on blankets while adults stood watching the colorful explosions overhead. Around 9:45 p.m., he loaded one of the mortar shells into its tube. He lit the fuse and stepped back, but something went wrong. The fuse burned down, but the firework failed to launch. After waiting approximately 30 seconds, he approached the tube. This was his critical mistake. Professional mortar shells contain enough explosive powder to propel them hundreds of feet into the air. They are not meant to be handled after a failed ignition attempt. Witnesses later reported that he leaned directly over the tube, presumably to check if the fuse was still lit. In that moment, the delayed chemical reaction finally triggered. The mortar exploded with its full force while still inside the launch tube. The explosion created a focused upward blast wave. The shell, traveling at an estimated 300 feet per second, struck his neck and jawline. The impact severed his head from his body completely. The force was so violent that witnesses 20 feet away felt the concussion wave. Neighborhood children who had been watching the display screamed as they saw his body collapse to the ground. His head had been thrown nearly 15 feet away by the force of the blast. Adults rushed to shield the children's eyes, but for many, it was already too late. First responders arrived within minutes, but there was nothing to be done. The 41-year-old construction worker had died instantly. His brainstem severed before his consciousness could even register the explosion. The human firework. On July 4th, 2015, in the small border town of Calais, Maine, a 22-year-old man was celebrating Independence Day with friends. The evening had been filled with drinking, laughter, and increasingly poor decision-making. By 11 p.m., the group had consumed significant amounts of alcohol, and their judgment was severely impaired. The man, a former Disney World employee who once played Gaston in park performances, had been setting off fireworks throughout the evening. Among their collection was a reloadable mortar tube, a professional-grade pyrotechnic that launches explosive shells hundreds of feet into the air. These devices contain enough of black powder to create substantial force, approximately equivalent to a quarter stick of dynamite. As the night progressed and inhibitions lowered, he announced what he claimed would be a joke. He placed the 3-inch diameter mortar tube on top of his head, balancing it like a hat. His friends later reported that they thought he was merely pretending and had no actual intention of lighting it. In a split-second decision that would prove fatal, he held a lighter to the fuse while the tube remained positioned on his skull. The mortar was pointed downward, meaning the explosive force would be directed directly into his head, rather than propelling a shell upward. The fuse burned quickly, taking just under 2 seconds. When it reached the charge, the explosion created instantaneous catastrophic damage. The force shattered his skull, driving bone fragments into his brain. The heat from the blast simultaneously caused third-degree burns to the remaining tissue. His friends witnessed the moment of detonation in stunned horror. The top of his head essentially disappeared in the explosion. He collapsed immediately, blood pooling beneath what remained of his skull. Despite frantic calls to emergency services, there was no possibility of survival. Medical examiners later confirmed that death had been instantaneous. The blast wave had destroyed his brainstem, ending all neural activity before his body even hit the ground. Highway bridge collapse. On February 1st, 2013, an ordinary morning commute in China's Henan province became a scene of unprecedented destruction. Shortly after 7 a.m., a cargo truck heavily loaded with fireworks approached the Yichang Bridge near Sanmenxia City. The elevated expressway, standing 90 feet above the ground, carried thousands of vehicles daily across the Yi River. The truck contained approximately 6 tons of commercial fireworks destined for Lunar New Year celebrations. Chinese regulations classified these particular pyrotechnics as 1.3G explosives, professional-grade materials with substantial explosive potential. Under Chinese law, such cargo required special permits and safety protocols, none of which the driver possessed. Traffic was moving at approximately 40 miles per hour, and witnesses noticed smoke coming from the truck's cargo area. The driver, likely aware of the imminent danger, attempted to pull over on the bridge shoulder. He never made it. At 7:28 a.m., the first explosion occurred. It was relatively small, but ignited the remaining inventory. Within 3 seconds, the primary detonation followed. The blast created a pressure wave estimated at 35 pounds per square inch, strong enough to rupture internal organs at close range. The explosion's force transferred directly into the bridge's concrete support columns. Engineers later explained that the concentrated energy overwhelmed the structure's load-bearing capacity. The reinforced concrete, designed to withstand vertical pressure but not explosive force, cracked and then shattered. A section of roadway measuring 260 feet collapsed almost immediately. Surveillance footage showed the bridge buckling like a wave before disintegrating. 26 vehicles, including 5 trucks and 17 cars, plunged nearly 90 feet to the frozen ground below. The combined trauma of the explosion and fall was instantly fatal for most victims. Those who survived the initial blast suffered massive internal injuries from the impact. Bodies recovered showed compound fractures, severed limbs, and extensive internal hemorrhaging. Many were burned beyond recognition by the fireball that engulfed the wreckage. Among the 26 people who perished, several remained alive briefly, trapped in crushed vehicles as secondary explosions continued around them.